really like doing these podcasts. I don't know if y'all knew that or not, but it's one of my favorite things in the world to do. Is put together a podcast and upload it. I love it. This one's a little bit longer than normal. I think I've got 6 stories in this one. I'll explain what's going on as we move along, but I really want you to enjoy it. So let's get moving. All right, here we go. Here is a story from the state of Maine. The writer says I can use his first name, but he actually works for a government agency. So I'm going to play it safe and not even mention his first name, but he'll know I'm reading a story when he hears it, if he hears it. Here's what he writes. I grew up enjoying the outdoors, hunting and fishing as much as I could, probably at the expense of my high school GPA at times. When I left high school, I went into the United States Army as an airborne light infantryman. In 2 different units, I was in the battalion scout platoon, which in a light battalion is something you have to be selected for. We spent a whole lot of time in the woods in small teams trying to remain hidden and silent in the course of our duties. Every now and then, especially in Alaska, I would hear or see something that I couldn't place. But I was never thinking about Sasquatch. It was not until after the Army that I became suddenly aware that something else was out there. My Army career ended at 15 years of active duty. I was a senior NCO, but I was stuck in recruiting and it was killing me. I longed for the days of leading soldiers in the field and not trying to survive in the recruiting command from day to day. We moved from Maine to our last duty station, where I earned the right to be a hunting, fishing, and recreation guide. I say earn the right because to be a registered Maine guide is a bit of an ordeal. You can't just hang out a sign and start a business. The licensing process is thorough. You have to demonstrate you are a capable outdoorsman and leader. The Maine woods can be a dangerous place, and the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife are careful about who should or who should not be taking people into the wilderness. It was a great opportunity, but after the economic turndown of 2008, I struggled to keep things going for a few years. I ended up landing a great job with the federal government, though I certainly don't spend as much time outside now as I would like to. I'm a lifelong outdoorsman who has probably spent a whole lot more time in the wilderness area than many of the keyboard skeptics who insist that we all must be crazy for believing in Sasquatch. I'm not just a believer, I'm a knower. My wake-up call came in the Maine bear season of 2009. I was guiding an area just northeast of Bald Mountain Pond, a fair way southeast of the last paved road at Moxie. I had 2 hunters on stands 2 miles apart. It was nearing sunset on a beautiful day. Because I needed to pick up the hunters within an hour or so, I decided to quietly roll my truck out onto a high point on a logging road between the 2 hunters. From there, I would hear any shots that might come from either side, and from there I could plan my approach to pick them up. Both stands were crawling with bears, so I expected one of them to harvest one. Typically, I'd wait until a half hour past sunset, and then I'd start the walk into the stand to get them in the dark. In those woods, a guide can't let their sports climb down on their own to walk out. That's just asking for trouble. I had the window down and the truck off, and I was enjoying air while reading an awesome Louis L'Amour book. And suddenly, from a dark shadow 100 yards to my left, a loud howl erupted. This started as a low growl, and it worked its way up in pitch to a volume that no human can match. Whatever made this noise had lungs much larger than a human, and it was directed at me, and it penetrated deeply into the truck and into my core. I quickly went through my mental Rolodex of critters from the Maine woods, and nothing matched. I wasn't in full panic mode, but I was a little concerned. I did have a loaded revolver on my belt, and I did unsnap the holster and roll up the window. There was something big in that dark shadow, but it was in the timber and I couldn't make out a shape. As dusk grew, I slowly crawled the truck off to pick up my hunters. I went about my business for the rest of that trip, and I'd almost put it out of my mind when the season was over. Then it all dawned on me while the family was flipping through channels on television one night. Just as the kids were clicking past a show on Sasquatch, the team of researchers was deploying what they called the Ohio Howl. Well, I'll be damned if that wasn't exactly what I heard. I stopped the kids at the channel and I watched transfixed through the end of the show. Since then, I've been fascinated by anything about this supposedly mythical creature. Well, that's the end of my first story, and I've had one or two minor things happen since then. My daughter and I had some impressive wood knocks on either side of us while we were hunting deer out in the hard-to-reach part of the Black Hills of South Dakota. She thought that was cool, and since she was in her first deer season at about age 11 at the time. I have another story that's just as interesting. It isn't about me, though. At the time I was guiding, we lived in Jefferson, Maine. It's a great little village at the top of, here's another name I can't pronounce. Let me try to sound it out. Damariscotta Lake. Damariscotta Lake. I'm just going to go with that. If you're ever there, it's well worth a stop at the village store to grab a sandwich and ask what the fish you're hitting on. My neighbor was also a registered Maine guide. In fact, he was a master guide. There were 3 of us there on the road. We're all pretty friendly with each other. And this fella also owned a Christmas tree farm, which he liked to hunt on his own. His property was up the road and technically in the next town. One day he arrived in my driveway and he was a bit flustered. He was saying that he saw a werewolf on his property. He came down to see me because he knew I had young children. He was sitting in his tiny tool shed at the far back of his property, right along Davis Stream. This was a habitat edge where the acorn-laden oaks abutted his tree farm at the stream. There was a deer trail that meandered alongside the inside edge of the oaks, and from his little shed, it was an easy 50-yard shot. He'd been doing this for years because he was getting older. Hunting ridgelines and swamps was not for him anymore. Besides, it was his land and it was a safe place to shoot. He hunted ethically and he didn't bait deer. The natural fodder was enough to attract the deer. He said he saw a large creature walking on 2 legs coming down the deer trail from right to left as he was facing the stream. At first, he thought the figure was a trespasser in dark clothes. As this thing got closer, he could tell that it wasn't a man. He said it was 8 feet tall, and it walked on legs that looked like a powerful set of dog legs, which he said looked really awkward. This lifelong hunter and master guide described this creature as having a snout and pointed ears unlike a bear. He said the upper torso was powerfully built like a serious weightlifter. The dogman creature walked until it was directly in front of him at 50 yards, and then it dropped to all 4s and it ran down the deer trail toward where my house was at the time. Well, this frightened him because he knew that my kids spent a lot of time outside playing in the dirt or playing army and just being kids. He told me his story with all sincerity and no obvious deception in his demeanor. He expressed fear and legitimate concern. And sadly, this kind man took his own life very shortly after the incident. I hope that his sighting had nothing to do with it. So there you have it. There are 2 stories from the great state of Maine. It is a beautiful place with endless miles of shoreline, forests, lakes, and mountains to explore. Just keep your eyes open and you just might see something when you're taking it all in. Best regards, and he signs off. That's a great set of stories. That's 2 stories. Both of them kind of give me the willies. I mean, this guy's sitting at the top of a ridge reading a Louis L'Amour book, and all of a sudden something screams at him from 100 yards away, and it just rocks him to the core. I can understand that he put it out of his mind by the end of the season, because you just kind of explain these things away and you move on with your life. But this story about the dog man and it coming from a master guide, I don't know exactly what these guys have to go through to be a guide in Maine, but him being a soldier in the Army and one of these light reconnaissance battalions or squads or groups or whatever they are, those guys are usually, they stay in real good shape throughout their careers and they become addicted to exercising. Damn, I wish I could. I wish I was addicted to exercising. I'd be in a lot better shape too. But these guys are tough and they're level-headed. They don't make quick decisions, and when they do, it's all basically out of instinct. And this guy just walks up and tells him out of nowhere about seeing a werewolf. Now, who does that? Level-headed people don't do that. If they're telling you that, you can probably believe their stories. But I thought this was great. To the writer, thanks for sending it. I've had it a long time, and I'm glad I could finally get it in a podcast. It's really good. Thank you, sir. Okay, here's a story about a dog, and you guys are going to have to decide whether this is a Bigfoot event or something else. But it's a great story. It's really a good, real mystery kind of story. The writer doesn't give her name, so I'm not going to, or she doesn't give me permission to give her name, so I'm not going to use it. But here's what she writes. This is a true story about my dog and our farm near North Ogden, Utah. Crystal Blue is my dog's name, but everyone calls her Mama. She's a Blue Heeler mix, and in 2019, she was a year old. She loves to run all over the property, and she roams the neighbor's property too. Around midnight on a cold night in February, I let her outside to do her business. It was snowing, and a fresh blanket of snow covered the ground. After letting her walk outside, I walked back to my room to get a cigarette. It was a few minutes before I got back to the porch, and I lit up and finished my cigarette, and then I called for her. Typically, she comes back to me right away, but she didn't on this night, so I yelled louder. Still, she didn't come. After several attempts, I became worried. I rushed back inside and found my roommate and asked if he would help me to find my dog. I think he saw the worry in my expression. Well, he agreed, and we went back outside and we called some more. She was gone. She never came back. Her tracks in the snow were obvious, so we began to follow them. And from the tracks, we saw that she left the porch and then made 2 circles around the yard and then headed for a fence that separated our property from our neighbors. The tracks finally turned, and it appeared that she had gone under the fence. From there were 3 tracks, and then nothing but pristine snow. This area is open with no trees, shrubbery, or buildings close by. It was as if she vanished into thin air. And to us, it looked impossible. Neither of us could wrap our head around this, but here we were, looking at it. By this time, I was beginning to panic and on the verge of losing it. My roommate calmed me a bit and said that we would keep looking, and we spent an hour searching everything and everywhere on our property and the neighbors. There was no sign of the dog anywhere, not a sound, not a track, zero evidence that she went anywhere after the tracks ended under the fence. I wanted to keep looking, so we split up and we searched everything again. This took about an hour. It was still snowing. I was bawling uncontrollably, and we were soaked and freezing. We needed to get warm, but I wouldn't give up, so we split up again to cover the same ground a third time. Stumbling now in the snow, I started for the front end of the property while my roommate went the other way. And I suppose I walked less than a football field when suddenly my dog was right in front of me. She acted like she had not seen me in a month. Then I immediately scooped her up in my arms and I hugged her. And then I stood and yelled for my roommate, "I've got her!" My roommate Jim and I had spent hours out looking for this dog, and we were both soaked and cold. The weird thing was that Mama was dry like she had never gone outside. Even her paws were dry. How was this possible? I don't know what happened to my girl that night, but I know that several times that month I saw lights in the sky that I'd never seen before. And it wasn't just me. Many people who lived in that area saw them. I believe my dog had been abducted. That night the lights were there. I remember telling them thank you for sending my dog back and to please never take her again. And since then they have not. She's almost 4 now, and I thank the Lord for her every day. And that's the end of her email. And that's you might think this is a UFO story, but we don't know what it is. And I thought it might fit well with a possible Bigfoot. Could a Bigfoot not have picked her up? Of course, there weren't any tracks where she just kind of vanished, so probably not. But it kind of smelled Bigfooty to me, so I thought I'd include it in this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Okay, this is something totally different. I've never done this before. I've had other people guest narrate on this podcast, but nobody's just out of the blue sent me a voice recording of a story. This man will introduce himself when you hear it. It's really a good little recording. He sent it to me. He sent me the text for the story, and he goes, "Why don't you go ahead and do this? But here's a recording if you want to know kind of how I envisioned it would go." I said, "I'm not changing a thing, man. I'm just putting your voice on my podcast." So that's what I'm doing. If there's anybody out there who thinks they want to give this a whirl and send me a recording, you can do it with your phone. Just record into a phone. Record a good story, send it to me, and if it looks like it'll fit in my podcast, I'll put it in there. But as you listen to this, you guys make a comment and let the man who made this recording know that he's pretty good at this. I think he should do some more of these. All right, let's get into his little story. This is great. You're going to love it.
Here's one of our Christmas presents to all our dear peoples. This is Doc Henry, one of your fellow peoples. And this is exactly what I thought Cam's first encounter with a Bigfoot would be like. Now, 'twas the night before Bigfoot. A sighting report from terrors and tales that will shake to the bone and bring screams in great wails. On a night before Christmas, what if it's true? Then you must be aware this could happen to you. We begin. 'Twas the night before Bigfoot, on the farm near the glen. Not a creature was stirring, except that darn hen. So the stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were all nestled all snug in their beds, yet from the window stared gray-faced a huge hairy head. Mom in her PJs, on the stand my sports cap, we'd all settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a menacing horror to Sasquatch below, when what to my terror-filled eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh with 8 Bigfoot so near. To the familiar red driver, so lively and quick, I silently yelled, "Please run! Run, St. Nick!" More fierce than 10 grizzlies, Bigfoot kills or maims, while Nick whistled and shouted, "To the closet I came. Come 10 gauge, come 308 AR-10, come 50 caliber, my old deadly friend. but all I could grab was a knife for the battle. I'd slipped on the floor when that screaming hen cackled. I must save Christmas. I must save St. Nick. But I could only limp with my broken broomstick. Yet to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, still I dashed, almost ran, and I gave it my all. When to my amazement, and a picture so clear, these Bigfoot were helping Santa's tired reindeer. The burdened small sleigh lay stuck in the mud, but a few pulls from Bigfoot broke it free with a thud. So up on the rooftop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing, the pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. Then he reached for the door. I said, "No, Santa, don't. Those Bigfoot could grab you, and let go they won't." A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He reached for the door and brought 3 Bigfoot close, father, mother, and a young cute one most. "It's my hairy friend Henry," a young voice cheered behind me. 'Twas my own little son with smiles waving to Henry. Nick spoke. "Hadn't you wished your families to meet? Well, now here they are, just as you hoped they would be." With smiles and hugs and tears all around, the little ones danced, hugged, and gleed in a joyous sound. Nick laughed. "Now off to your beds with those sweet little heads. I have much work to do before I'm home warm and fed." He then spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings in turn with a jerk, and laying a finger to the side of his nose, giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, and to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, as he drove out of sight, "Merry Christmas, my Bigfoot, and to all a good night." Now, in case you thought Santa's sleigh was so stuck, no, he'd set it right there with that good Santa's luck. But should you need help where St. Nick gets the same, you can call out to Jesus, Nick's Savior's sweet name. Merry Christmas.
This is a good little story from Arkansas. The writer says, "My name is Kenneth and I live in an area called Arklatex. It's where the Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas state lines meet. I grew up in Texarkana back in the 1960s, and my family and I love to go camping in the river bottoms of Little River, Arkansas in Little River County. I reported this event several years ago to other reporting agencies or organizations. I went dormant afterwards due to the ridicule and other family members recanting from what we experienced this night. So I'm the only one still holding on to the actual events that took place in August of 1969 when we encountered a white Bigfoot. I was 12 years old when we had our first encounter on a Friday afternoon at Cottonwood Shoals. My family and I were excited about going on a weekend camping trip. My brothers and I got the family truck loaded with all our gear. And when my father got home from work, there would be no delay in getting to the woods. As we were leaving, a family member who lives a couple of houses down stepped out to the curb and she waved us down. She was my aunt's mother-in-law, and she asked us not to go camping at Cottonwood Shoals. She said that her and her husband were there a couple of weeks ago and saw a hairy man peering at them from behind some brush while she was fishing, and it scared the hell out of her. She said she had run to get her husband who was fishing, and she told him what had happened. Well, he called her a crazy old woman. Oh, man, what a mistake. He called her a crazy old woman, and then he took her home. My father told her that we would keep a lookout for this monster and that she shouldn't worry about us. And I'll be honest, We were all laughing as we drove away. We don't laugh anymore. I'm about to tell you why. We arrived in time to set up camp and have supper. My 3 older brothers got their fishing gear, and they went to get a night in of catfishing. It was getting dark when my mother and younger sister and 2 younger brothers crawled into the tent. They were ready to turn in for the night. My father enjoyed sitting by the campfire, drinking beer and listening to country music on the radio. I wasn't ready for bed, so I decided to take a short walk down the road. The moon was bright enough so that I could see without a flashlight, and I hadn't walked far from the campsite, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I felt a current of wind whiz by me. Something had been thrown at me. And I turned around. I didn't see anyone. And for whatever reason, the woman's story about seeing the hairy man came to mind, so I ran straight back to camp. My father asked what had me in a hurry, and I blew it off, saying that I was just tired and ready for bed. And once in the tent, I noticed our dog was acting weird. He was alert and staring at the wall like it knew something was out there. Well, I bedded down and we slept through an uneventful night. Saturday was the big day for swimming and fishing and exploring the area. I was down the road where my brothers had been catfishing the night before, and I had the place to myself. Behind me, across the road, were some pea gravel piles placed there by the county. From that area, I heard noises like weird bird sounds. I looked around and I didn't see any birds. This went on for several minutes. To this day, I've never heard noises like that before. And I noticed my 2 younger brothers playing behind the piles, and all I could see was the tops of one of their heads. They both had cotton white hair then, so it was easy to see it was them, even though all I could see was the top of their heads. Okay, I thought. It's just my brothers playing in the gravel piles. As long as they stay over there and don't bother me while I'm fishing, that'll be fine. Later in the morning, I heard my mother calling us to come back to camp for lunch, so I grabbed up my fishing pole and I headed back. When I arrived at camp, my brothers were there. The only way they could have beat me there was if they'd have gone straight through the woods. Well, I told them they needed to stick to the roads because the woods were full of snakes and chiggers. They looked at me like I was crazy. They went on to say that they had not even left camp all morning. Of course, I thought they were messing with me. I had seen them playing close to where I'd been fishing. I let it go. We all had a fun day. By 9:30 that night, I was tired and ready for bed. I crawled into the tent with the others, and I was drifting off when our dog started acting weird again. We had left the dog outside to sleep that night, and somehow, with his teeth, he had opened the zipper door of the tent and squeezed inside. He woke everyone up. The dog came over by me, and it was trembling, like he was cold, but I could see by the whites of his eyes that he was scared. My mom told me to close the zipper and let the dog stay in the tent again that night. That dog crawled in so close to me, I think he was trying to get under me. At some point during the night, my mother woke me up. She was getting up to go to the bathroom in a spot behind the tent. A few minutes later, her screams startled us fully awake. Well, I immediately stood to look out the tent mesh window, and I saw my mother running back to the tent with her drawers still down around her knees. She kept screaming, "Something's out there! It's watching me! It's watching me!" She made it back to the tent and was screaming the same thing over and over to my father. Well, he finally got her quiet enough to understand what she was even saying, and then he asked her, "What's watching you?" By chance, I began panning the woods and I saw a large figure run past our truck. The truck rocked back and forth as it ran by. This thing was huge. It really shook me up. And then my mother began to describe this thing to my father. She said it was a giant, and it looked like an ape. It was covered in white hair, and it had long arms. It was only a few feet from her when she noticed it. That's when I told them that I saw something run by the truck while I was looking out the window. So all the men walked over to look around in that direction. Beside the truck were giant tracks clearly visible in the dust. My father noticed a dent in the rear fender that had not been there before. When my mother had started screaming, she had scared the creature as much as he scared her, and it ran away. That was my guess. I guess not paying attention to what was in front of it, it ran into the truck and then carried on with its escape. That's what I thought, but that wasn't the case. Now my father was worried. I could see it in his demeanor. Out of the truck, he pulled a shotgun, and he handed it to my brother to stand guard while we packed up camp. We were leaving. This was one of those times when it took no encouragement for any of us to pack up camp. It was dark and hard to see everything, but we started throwing things loosely into the bed of the truck. We had that campsite packed up in record time. And then one of my brothers yelled out, "There it is!" He raised the shotgun and he fired into the darkness. And then my father yelled out, "It's circling the camp, hurry up, we gotta go." By this time I was terrified. I know the rest of my family was too, and we couldn't get out of there fast enough. Finally, with all of us in the truck, my father turned the key and it started, and in a few minutes, we were gone. We made it home in the early morning hours, and we all went straight to bed. It had been an exhausting night. The next day, our aunt came over to ask why we were home early. Well, she already knew, but she wanted to hear about it. We all sat in the living room comparing notes on what everyone had seen. Apparently, it was the same creature. None of us laugh at Bigfoot stories now. We take them very seriously. Man, I bet you do. Whew, I bet that was scary. I bet your mama still has nightmares about seeing that thing standing there while she was going to the bathroom. What a scary story. I don't know where Cottonwood Shoals is. I might need to look that up on a map. I lived in Arkansas for a while. Not down in South Arkansas, but I have been down there quite a bit. I used to deer hunt down there, and it's just a flat delta river bottom area. Just your typical southern muddy place. Those are the places I love, so I kind of like that area. Anyway, it's a great story, Kenneth. I appreciate you sending it. Thank you, sir. I bet there's a lot of you guys out there wondering about what to order your friends and family for last-minute gifts or stocking stuffers for Christmas, which is coming up in about 2 weeks. Don't forget Yeti Bars. I just looked at their website. Every bar of soap that is normally $7 looks like it's down to $5.40 for a Christmas sale. And if you use the code DC10 at checkout, you get an additional 10% off of that. You cannot go wrong. It's a great bargain. It's a great product. Give them a look. YetiBars.net and Yeti Bars on Facebook. And don't forget, they're running a contest at the moment. If you place an order before December the 15th, your name goes in a drawing for a $1,000 cash prize. Check them out. YetiBars.net, Yeti Bars on Facebook. They'd love to hear from you. The writer of this email gave this story a title. It's called The Bailey Cove Incident. Here's what he writes. It's been 17 years since this incident took place. Until recently, we had not discussed what happened to the 5 of us while camping at Bailey Cove Campground. It always felt like a taboo subject to bring up. This past Mother's Day in 2021, we were able to get all of our adult kids to travel home to celebrate their mother. We had a great visit with everyone, and one of the big topics of discussion was our upcoming camping trip into the Sierra Nevadas. Later that evening, we were all out on the patio talking about the upcoming camping trip when my youngest spoke up and said, "Hopefully we don't have any unwelcome visitors this time." Everyone laughed, and then my oldest spoke out, "Hey, Dad, what do you really think happened to us that time on Shasta Lake?" Oh, man, I thought to myself, please let this be going in the direction that I have wanted it to go for the last 17 years. "What trip to Shasta Lake are you talking about?" I asked. "Dad," everyone said. "Are you talking about the Bailey Cove campground trip?" "Yes, that trip," said everyone. I glanced at my son and daughter-in-laws and saw a bit of confusion in their faces. So I said, "Let's talk about it, but maybe we should start at the beginning so folks here that weren't present at the time can better understand what happened." The next 90 minutes was great. I started off the conversation, and we all took turns telling what we remembered happening. I think it was good therapy for all of us to talk about it. September 10th, 2004 would forever change our young family and the belief that only four-legged creatures live in the wilderness. Our family had a summer routine of 2 camping trips each year. But as September approached in 2004, we had not been able to go camping yet. It had been a busy summer. My wife mentioned that she wanted to plan a quick camping trip to Shasta Lake for the following weekend. Well, I thought it was a great idea because I had the next Saturday through Monday off from work. We just needed to decide what campground we wanted to use. My wife suggested Bailey Cove Campground because it was only a 20-minute drive, and I was able to get the reservations with no problems. We arrived at Bailey Cove Campground and checked in with the park ranger, who told us not many folks were there and we could choose our own campsite. We got the trailer backed onto the pad. Not long after, we were cooking hot dogs over the campfire. And then we got the kids ready for bed and tucked in. Afterward, I joined my wife out by the fire pit. We stayed up for another couple of hours enjoying the evening. Once the flames had died down, I doused the coals with water, and by 11:30 p.m., we were all asleep. At some point in the middle of the night, a loud cracking sound woke me. A large branch was snapped off a nearby tree. It was loud, and I could hardly believe I was the only person awake. I thought about shaking my wife awake, but it was quiet outside now. Maybe I had imagined that loud noise. I lay there on my back with my eyes wide open and listening, and all I could hear was my heart beating. And then I thought, that was no sound at all. I must have dreamed it. It was freakishly quiet, though. There were no crickets, no breeze, no traffic sounds. It was almost suffocating. That's the only way I can describe it. And then I heard the sound of footsteps on pine needles and twigs. Whatever it was coming toward us. My imagination was starting to mess with me. Too many CSI Las Vegas episodes with a crazed killer on the loose, I guess. It was most likely a deer, I thought, maybe a bear or a raccoon. So I closed my eyes and I think I fell back to sleep. But what happened next is when things got real. My eyes opened with a loud crunching sound of something walking on the crushed rock that surrounded the asphalt pad. And I sat straight up. I noticed that my wife and son were now moving and confused. One of the kids asked about the sounds. "It's probably a bear," I said. Whatever was outside started walking slowly back and forth in the crushed rock. I could tell it was heavy. My wife's white-knuckled grasp on my arm was intense. She finally spoke up and said, "It sounds like a person walking, not a bear." That's exactly what I thought, but I played it off again as a bear. And through the mesh screen, we couldn't see anything moving. And finally I said, "Whoever's outside, you need to leave now. I'm armed and we're about to call the police." That only woke up our 2 daughters, and the youngest one immediately sensed the tension of the situation and she started crying. I told my wife to call 911. She asked me if I was really armed, and I told her no, that I'd left the handgun locked up in the truck. Whatever was out there ignored my demands anyway, and the pacing increased. There was no cell service where we were. I couldn't believe how close we were to civilization with no cell service. 20 years later, nothing's really changed. It was 2:30 a.m. at this point, and all 5 of us were huddled in the dinette area. I double-checked to make sure the flimsy camper door was locked, and I grabbed the flashlight. I called out again, and the pacing back and forth stopped. One of the kids said, "Dad, you should go outside and check to see if it's still there." Well, I didn't know what to say. I had to figure out a reply that made me sound like the protector of the family, but gave me an excuse for not going outside. I was about to speak when something or someone tried to open the door. Everyone freaked out, and the screaming inside the camper was deafening. I have never felt such fear in my life. I felt certain we were all going to die a horrible death. I really did feel powerless. Whatever was outside was now grunting and breathing heavy. Feeling like my next move was going to save us, I started zipping up all the windows, acting like that would protect us. Next, a loud slap from the side of the camper happened. It was near the back and on the same side as the door. One of the kids yelled out, "Dad, do something!" Well, I didn't know what to do. There's not a worse feeling as a father when you can't protect your loved ones. The next thing this monster did was a slap dead center on the roof of the camper, and then it scraped its fingers across the top, like fingernails across a chalkboard. Screams for help came from all of us inside the camper. My ears were ringing from the extreme decibel levels coming from everyone's cries. And then I heard footsteps in the crushed rock again. I tried to get everyone to quiet down so I could listen. It was relatively quiet except for the heavy breathing and sniffing from inside the camper. I thought I heard a couple of small branches break and a few faint footsteps heading up the steep hill. Maybe it was leaving. Everything was silent for 5 minutes, and I told my wife what I wanted to do next. My plan was to run to the pickup and drive off as quickly as possible with the trailer in tow and get to the ranger station and then go from there. No, I had not unhooked the trailer from the truck. She liked the plan, and we explained to the kids what we were about to do. Trying to quietly open the camper door wasn't going as planned. Usually the thing just swung open at the slightest turn of the handle, but it didn't this time. So I turned the knob fully down to the open position and gave the door a pop with my right shoulder. The door popped open and flew out of my grip, smashing into the side of the camper. I rolled out onto the asphalt and I sprinted like an Olympic hurdler, jumping over the fire pit and a chair or two as I headed around the front of the truck. Just as I got to the truck door, a blood-curdling scream blew up the night. It was so deafening and long that it made my insides churn. It scared me so bad that I dropped the keys. I finally found them, and I fumbled to get the correct key and get it into the lock. I was doing all of this in the dark. Then the next scream came. You could not tell where this monster was. It sounded like it was coming from every direction. The truck started, and I threw it into drive and floored the gas. It went forward a foot or two, and then the tires began to spin. That's when I remembered the wheels on the trailer were chocked. I put the truck in reverse and backed up a little, and then put it back into drive and said, "Hold on, guys," and I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck shuddered, and the trailer launched into the air like a kid jumping a BMX bike. And in the glow of the tail lights, I could see that the trailer was still behind the truck. And I kept the hammer down as best as I could on the narrow road, and when we got near the ranger station, I pulled to the side and then ran back to get my family. The door on the camper flew open, almost hitting me in the face. You've never seen a wife and 3 young kids sprint so quickly, and they dove into the cab. I yelled to my wife to get behind the wheel and lock the doors while I unhooked the trailer. And in 30 seconds, I was back at the truck, and I met my oldest daughter's crying face at the window as she unlocked the door. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said as I slammed the door shut. My wife fishtailed up the road for 200 feet. We climbed the winding road faster than any vehicle should be allowed. The crying now was because we had escaped whatever it was that had terrified us. What should have been a 23-minute drive home took much less time. Our youngest daughter, who was and still is the family's backseat driver from hell, chimed up and said, "Dad, it's okay that she's going fast. We just want to get home." We made it home in Redding and pulled into our driveway just minutes after 4 a.m. Everyone rushed into the house, and I locked up the truck and headed for the front door. Once in the house, everyone had their pillows and blankets from their beds on the living room floor. Everyone laid there with their eyes wide open. I asked if anyone wanted to talk about what we had just experienced. Nobody said a word. That was fine with me. I didn't want to talk about it anyway. Everyone eventually dozed off. It was the phone that woke us the next morning at 8 o'clock. It was the park ranger. She seemed concerned our camper trailer was left in the middle of the park road and our campsite was in total disarray. I apologized and I told her that I'd be there soon to clean everything up. As I backed up the truck to the tent trailer, I saw the ranger was there waiting. I told her I'd have our mess cleaned up within 20 minutes and be gone. She didn't seem too concerned about the mess, but more concerned about why we left so quick. She mentioned that the other family in the campground had packed up too and left before she arrived at 7:30 a.m. She said that they were supposed to have stayed another 5 days and she hadn't been able to contact them by phone. I told her that we had had a couple of bears the night before and they were not the normal friendly type we usually see while camping here. I pretty much kept it at that, and our campsite wasn't really that bad. One of the older lounge chairs was completely bent, and one of the large air mattresses that I had blown up before dinner had been ripped in half. I was 5 minutes from being finished with loading up when the ranger's truck pulled up alongside mine. She commented on how quickly I had loaded up. I felt like she was trying to get me to talk about what happened. I continued throwing stuff in the back of the truck and I started to cover it up with a tarp. I was just about to say goodbye when she asked me where the iron grate insert for the campfire pit was. Well, I didn't know where it was. It was there last night, I said, when we had our campfire. Well, it's missing now. If you can't find it, we're going to have to bill you for a replacement, she said. Go ahead and bill me, I said, because I'm not looking for it. And I jumped in the truck and I left. The ranger called the house the next afternoon. She wanted to let me know that the fire pit grate had been found. It was 200 feet away from our campsite. She made a big deal on how strange it was for that to have happened, and she asked me what really happened. And I told her those bears were just a couple of real pranksters, I guess, and I said goodbye, and I hung up. After I hung up, I wondered about the things that had happened that could not be explained. The heaviness of the bipedal steps, the slap on the middle of the roof that was 8 feet tall, and the turning of the doorknob on the trailer, ignoring the threat of being shot, the sustained guttural ear-piercing screams and the howls, and the feeling of immense dread and shock I had. Why did that other family leave 5 days early? Did they have a visit as well? I'm sure they heard the insanely loud screams. Maybe most of all, how does a 50-pound, 1-inch thick iron grate travel 200 feet up a hill? I don't think a bear would do that. Well, that's my story, and it feels good to write this down and share our story with people who won't judge us as freaks. This event really happened, and even though I've injected a little humor here and there, it was absolutely nothing funny when this happened. Maybe the humor I used is a self-protection mechanism that helped me pen this on paper. Thank you, Cam and Neoma, for all your hard work with dixiecryptid and the What If It's Real podcast. God bless America. God bless America, man. I agree, and it's the What If It's True podcast, brother. But that's okay. You get the undercurrent of it, man. 2004, Bailey Cove Campground on Shasta Lake. Has anyone else had any kind of experience in that area? This is in California, by the way. I I think it's California. Pretty sure it is. Isn't that where the Sierra Nevadas are? Anyway, it's a great story. I know it scared them to death, but they're able this past Mother's Day to sit down and everybody's together and they talked about the whole trip. Probably had a lot of fun talking about it. You know, you can talk about things in the long distant past and sometimes you can laugh about them. And I bet that's what they were doing. So I'm glad this man sent this story. It was really good. He wrote a great story and I really appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Here's an email from Becky. Becky writes, I have contemplated writing you for quite a while, but the more of your videos I've listened to, the more I know I didn't imagine or dream the events that have happened to me over the past 57 years. So I decided to go ahead and send them. It is difficult to understand why. Why me? Northeastern Oklahoma is what the locals call green country. It's a rural and woodsy place that rolls into the Ozarks of northwest Arkansas. It was here, when I was 7, that it all began. I was a bedwetter. Fear of punishment for this made me somewhat restless at night. On this particular night, I was dreaming that I was on the toilet. Quickly and unconsciously, I told myself to wake up. The thought of a fresh green sapling switch on my rear end and legs jolted me into an upright position. As soon as I sat up, I had an odd feeling like I was being watched. The bed that I shared with my little sister, Nita, sat against the wall, perpendicular to a large double window that looked out onto a long cement porch that ran the entire length of the front of our house. The moonlight coming through the window lit up the room well enough that I could see that Nita had rolled off the bed and was pressed up against it in a deep sleep on the floor. I looked down and slowly placed my foot over her to get out of bed, and that's when I heard a tapping sound at the window, which was now behind me. I glanced back over my shoulder and I got the shock of my life. He was looking right at me. The moon was shining behind him, and it gave an almost halo effect to the head and shoulders of this man. His dark eyes seemed to sparkle as he smiled at me. It was more like a grimace. He had a wide mouth with not much lip, but it was enough to show his teeth. They were like mine, but they were only larger. His hair was long and silvery, mixed with some black and brown, except for the roots. They were almost white. His beard and the hair on his shoulders shone silvery in the dim light. I was confused. I had never seen such a hairy man before. As far as I could tell, he wasn't wearing a shirt. His nose was flat and his head was a little pointy. I thought that was weird, and I rubbed my eyes thinking I was still sleeping and this was a dream. And then I felt Nita move at my feet. I looked down and I realized this was no dream. I heard it grunt then, and it sounded like the hogs my uncle kept down by the barn. I looked back at the hairy man in the window and I thought how short he was until he stood up. All I could see were legs. I never moved so fast in my life. I leapt over Nita and I hit the floor, crawling as fast as I could to reach the doorway to the hall. We didn't have an actual door yet. The house was still under construction, but I knew once I reached the hallway, the hairy man couldn't see me anymore. My heart was beating in my ears, and I asked myself, was this really happening? I sat there with my back pressed against the wall and gathering my courage to peek back around into the bedroom. The window was empty, and he was gone. I was on the fence about whether or not to tell my aunt and uncle, who I lived with, about what I'd seen. Having been somewhat of a victim of child abuse, I decided not to wake them for fear that I would receive a beating of my life. Unfortunately, I had that kind of childhood. The next morning, I went out to the porch to see where the hairy man had first kneeled and then stood. On the brick ledge of the windowsill, there were 3 rocks. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now I wonder if they were some kind of gift. I think of this series of events in my life as the following, so that's what I call it. It seems like that's what happened. Whatever it is, it seems to have followed me throughout my life. I take care of my 85-year-old mother, who has recently been diagnosed with lymphoma. This is her 5th bout with cancer. She's the strongest woman I know. It means my time is limited like yours, but as soon as time allows, I will send you my second encounter. Well, Becky, I really do hope you send your second encounter. I'd like to tell you, if you're taking care of your 85-year-old mother, you're a hero. I'm really impressed with that. And I'd also like to say that I'm sorry that you grew up in a house as a little girl and were switched because you wet the bed. You know, that stuff just burns me up. Kids need a spanking every once in a while, but not for that stuff. They just don't need a spanking for that stuff. Do parents really think these kids will wake up and think, oh, I'm just going to pee in the bed? No, they don't do that. They can't control it. Bedwetting is a real common thing. Sometimes it's a mental thing, sometimes it's an emotional thing, and sometimes it's a physical thing. But until you know what it is, to beat your kid for it is just insane. It's insane. So, Becky, I'm sorry. You were abused, and I'm sorry I kind of went off on a tangent there, but oh, that stuff just burns me up. Burns me up when I hear about it and read it. All right, I'm going to calm down, and I'm going to thank Becky for this story. It was a wonderful story, and I really do hope you send your second encounter, because this was great. It would be real interesting to see what you say. All right, Becky, thank you. All right, y'all, this is an email that I've had probably for a year and a half. It's not a typical encounter story. And I come up on this thing at least once a month, and I read through it, and I think, how am I going to present this to the people who listen to this channel? And I need to get it done because the man took a lot of time to put this together. And so what I've decided to do, I'm just going to read it word for word. Now here, you're going to hear as I go through this that this guy is a pretty good writer, and there's some words I'm going to stumble over and some phrases, and I'm not going to edit them out. I'm just going to read it just like he wrote it. There are some footnotes that I probably won't read, but this is kind of interesting. There's 5 or 6 Bigfoot encounters here that I think you're going to get interested in. But to set it up, I need to read his whole email. So this is from Mr. Miller. I think he is with the International Paleochronology Group. Apparently, they're located in Columbus, Ohio, and their mission says the search for truth in science and education. So here's what this letter says. Who we are. We are a group of scientists and educators from Australia, France, Germany, Poland, Russia, and the United States who are dedicated to the search for truth in science and education on the subject of origins of life. Some of us locally in Columbus, Ohio, have been interested in Bigfoot, alias Sasquatch, and then he goes through a few names here that, anyway, I'm not going to do those, for many years. So as a volunteer director of the International Paleochronology Group, I want to make sure these reports receive public attention. So I'm sending them to Nance of Ohio Bigfoot and to Dixie Cryptid. Both of you have exchanged emails, so you are aware of each other's programs. Here are the 6 encounters located in Central Ohio as reported to me or to my son, Kevin Miller. We vouch for the sincerity of our relatives, neighbors, and friends who related these stories to us, and we appreciate very much your efforts that encourage folks with encounters and or friends and relatives to tell their stories. Okay, just hang with me here. I've already talked to Nance, and she was kind of unclear on whether she had done this one or not. So if you guys have heard this before, just click away. I don't know if she's done it or not, but it's pretty interesting. So again, this is not the typical story that I read them, but we'll just keep going with it. Our list of 6 sightings in Ohio and many encounters by one person in Pennsylvania unreported or unknown by BFRO, are as follows. Here's the first one, for which I was told to by a cousin, Thomas Ewing, now deceased when he was the sheriff of Heath, Ohio in Licking County. This sighting occurred in 1975 in Pataskala, Licking County, Ohio, probably Summit Road, probably Summit Road, a north and south road that crosses Route 16, that is an extension of Broad Street, a main east-west street running across Columbus to Heath in Newark, Ohio, about 20 miles away east. Summit Road is about 20 miles from downtown Columbus, Ohio, in Franklin County, with a population of 500,000 in 1975. Pataskala, I don't know what that word is, Pataskala, Pataskala police were called to investigate a very serious report by two teenage girls, possibly sisters, who were returning from roller skating when they first smelled a terrible odor like Limburger cheese. Whew. They then saw a very tall, huge, hairy bipedal creature cross a set of railroad tracks and then stepped over a rail or farm fence into an open field of high grass. They ran home and were so visibly shaken that the parents phoned the police, who came at once and made a report. The next day, they returned and checked the immediate area and found brownish hair on a barbed wire fence, which they sent to London, Ohio, to a forensics lab. A large area of grass had been matted down in the grassy field. According to the chief of police of Heath, Ohio, Thomas Ewing, who talked with the local police, was told that the lab could not identify the hair under the microscope, but described it as hollow and somewhat between a deer and a bear, nothing that they had examined or was in their exhibit file of many types of hair, including man-made. My cousin and I attended a UFO conference in Dayton, Ohio shortly after the incident, where they also discussed Bigfoot sightings. I eventually met up with a Bigfoot investigator in Cincinnati who had been investigating encounters in Kentucky and southern Ohio, and learned that he had cataloged many sightings in southern Ohio and Kentucky. My list and some others were emailed to BFRO about a year or so ago, but to my knowledge they were not reported, as I was never a witness. Here's encounter number 2. I'm not even going to comment on these, I'm just going to read them. Number 2, this encounter occurred in Canal, Winchester, Fairfield County, Ohio, about 15 miles from downtown Columbus, Ohio, in the fall of 1969 or 1970. Jan S., research physicist, a fellow scientist and friend, now age 64, was helping his parents move into their new home when he heard what appeared to him to be an angry howl coming from the adjacent clump of trees, after which he heard something move rapidly through a cornfield, breaking corn stalks as it ran. The howls were so unusual and loud that he remembers them to this day, when he told me after I had mentioned several stories. It was as if the unknown creature did not want them there. He later heard a few days later that there was a Bigfoot sighting in southern Ohio. Jan told of this encounter after I told him the encounter by the two girls from Licking County about 2017. Okay, here's number 3. When I told my next-door neighbor, Mr. Van Cullen, about 1975 of the Licking County sighting by the teenage girls, he told me of his sightings in a previous year. He and a friend were returning home by car from a southern Ohio deer hunting trip when they both saw a huge hairy bipedal creature running across an open harvested cornfield from one clump of trees to another. My neighbor, who was driving, asked his friend, "Did you see that?" His friend said, "Yes, I did. Keep driving." All right, here's number 4. A young man who was a student at Nazarene College of Mount Vernon, Knox County, Ohio, in 2015, told my son, Kevin Miller, without any discussion of Bigfoot offered about his encounter, as if he just had to tell someone. He was driving with a friend on a winding road when he came around a turn and saw in his headlights a hairy beast squatting in the road ahead. It got up quickly and easily walked bipedally up a steep slope, and then into the brush on top, as easy as we would walk on flat ground. This is almost identical to a sighting in Licking County in 1975 on the BFRO website. Kevin thinks that he would be reluctant to talk about it, but lives just 2 doors from Kevin's home. All right, here's a comment the writer makes about story number 4. I think it interesting that the BFRO reports showed many reports in north to south line of such counties as Ashland, Richland, Knox, Licking, Fairfield, Hocking, Ross, Pike, from north to south, similarly as observed in eastern Ohio, for the Bigfoot called the Grassman. Thus, this could be just another ancient pathway or trail that some Bigfoot families follow, but through the hilly countryside east of Columbus. There are hundreds of caves and caverns in Ohio, with only 6 open to the public, so with old barns and coal mines, there are plenty of living quarters in the winter. Another example, Alabama has over 4,000 caves, and lots of Bigfoot sightings also. Okay, here's number 5. My grandson, John of Pataskala, Ohio, in Licking County on the eastern edge of Franklin County, 20 miles from downtown Columbus, told me of his possible encounter in Pataskala, just off the north-south Summit Road on Old Maine Road, where a famous former governor of California has a second home with many other homes on one side and a forest on the other. This encounter occurred about 2013 when John was 15. It was within 5 miles of the sighting by the 2 girls. John and a friend were out late one night to visit a friend on Old Maid Road, about a mile from John's home, when they heard a presumably large animal howling in such a way from the woods as to seemingly disguise its voice as if it was an owl. They both looked at each other immediately as the strongest chill to ever run down their spines filled them with terror. By the time of the second howl, which followed in 2 to 4 second intervals for the next 10 minutes, simultaneously, they both started sprinting back down Old Mage Road the way they had come from. Each howl sounded less and less like an owl as the beast became less shy and put bass in its screeching yells. The beast continued to howl until they were just about at John's home. They know it was no owl because the noise sounded far too deep and heavy to be coming from a creature smaller than themselves, let alone an owl. Okay, that was number 5. Here's number 6. This incident occurred in Ross or Pike County, southern Ohio, near, I'm not even going to try this one, Chillicothe, Chillicothe, Ohio. I am a U.S. Army veteran and was wearing my Bigfoot cap when I visited the Wiley, Virginia Clinic for Blood Work in early 2019. The young lady nurse named Lindsay, who was assigned to take a blood sample, remarked, "I like your cap." Having just heard of my grandson's experience a few weeks earlier, I laughingly replied, "Have you heard a Bigfoot howl?" She said, "No, but I saw one." She continued, "I was driving home about 3:30 a.m. from Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, and was about 15 minutes from my home when this huge hairy creature ran across the county road on 2 legs, just 15 feet in front of my car. I saw it clearly in my headlights, and it was about 8 feet tall. When I got home, I was so scared I left the car door open and ran in to tell my parents. My father believed me, but my mother was skeptical. I will never forget it. I think this encounter scarred her, as she would not come to the BFRO lectures that we invited her to attend with us." All right, here's number 7. Northeast Pennsylvania, near the top of a 15-foot high hill in the 1990s, before and after. First, the background, which sets the stage for this and other encounters by Jacob, who made it clear to me that he does not even want the location known for fear of hunters invading his favorite outdoor haunts with an idea of hunting down a Bigfoot. He wants them to be free and safe. This is how I learned of Jake and his encounters. He phoned me to explain who he was and the two human-like footprints he had found embedded in Mississippi geologic formation, allegedly over 300 million years old, in 1999 on a small creek bank near the top of a hill or mountain. He had taken this loose rock to an anthropologist at Penn State University, and the professor granted that they were made by humans. When told their location, he said, "That can't be," and refused to talk any more about what he just saw. This was of great interest to me, as our team had made many trips to Glen Rose, Texas, to participate in excavating dinosaur footprints and human-like footprints together under 12 inches of crustaceous limestone and 3 inches of clay. There is an article entitled "Jacob's Mother and Child Print" by Doug Wilder, a biologist and one of our IPG members, in which he cites the scientific evidence for the validity of these footprints. In a meeting a few years later in his Pennsylvania hometown, Jake also told of a Bigfoot he encountered while camping out in a tent near the top of the same mountain. He was in his tent for the night with his nephew when something brushed the outside of the tent fabric. He opened the tent flap. Walking upright away from the tent about 50 feet away was a giant 10-foot tall hairy bipedal creature with glaring red eyes and fangs looking back at him. In the winter, in an opening in the same forest, he also saw Bigfoot tracks after a winter snow. There were 2 sets of very large human-like prints side by side and intermittently much smaller ones between, as if 2 adults were lifting an offspring up and down that was between them. He also told me in a phone conversation in 2019 that he had seen smaller ones about 6 feet tall peering around the trees watching him. He ignored them but observed them from the corner of his eye in the same forest. This is an abandoned coal mine, one of many and old foundations of small coal mining town of 1,500 people that was abandoned on top of that hill. Jacob is a woodsman and saw his first Bigfoot at age 15, standing next to a stop sign. It quickly moved back into the forest on 2 legs when it saw him and a friend. When the height of the sign was measured, he and his friend estimated that the beast was 8 feet tall. And when he told his older brother what they had seen, his brother was skeptical. So Jake's older brother said, "I want you and your friend to draw what you both allegedly saw now." And when they drew the pictures, they were identical, and so elder brother became a believer, but never saw any himself, as he was not an avid woodsman. All right, let's see here. Here's one from Uganda he has in this letter. I'll try to read this one. Uganda on the west coast of Africa. When I attended an international meeting on the origin of life in northern Kentucky in June of 2019, I was talking to a friend who was an aeronautical engineer and a Bigfoot skeptic about the many encounters that I've heard about, when one of the attendees listening to our conversation suddenly interrupted and said with great emphasis, "We have them in Uganda too. They're big and tall," as he raised one hand way above his head. I think my friend was at least momentarily stunned and was one surprised guy myself. Needless to say, I was delighted with my newly found friend from Uganda. So much for skepticism. Bigfoots, for whatever reason, are called elsewhere. Bigfoots, for whatever they are called elsewhere, are indeed worldwide, as we now know. And then he goes on with, there's a lot of his commentary under here. I'll just read the first bit of it. Thus, there's good reason to say that Bigfoot is an elusive giant ape-like bipedal creature. Strangely, there are far more depictions and stories about dinosaurs living with man than Bigfoot with man. The AD 986 report by Leif Erikson's team of explorers is one of the few good-written ancient reports that we have, but no Bigfoot drawings came with it. It is said most of the native tribes across North America have stories in their oral traditions describing giant hairy figures that look and behave very similar to what many Americans and Canadians have described over the past few centuries. Bigfoot is indeed controversial, just as dinosaur depictions, and have been made controversial by skeptics and those folks whose religious beliefs tell them that we are all descended from a common bacterial ancestors 600 million years ago. But that belief has been more than challenged by the existence of soft tissue in some dinosaur bones. By C14 dating testing of all bones of 20 dinosaurs in the thousands of years and depictions of dinosaurs by our ancestors in the past 500 to 5,000 years on every continent, with dinosaur and human-like footprints together in Texas, and also worldwide sedimentary strata like Cretaceous and Jurassic. Could some be Bigfoot prints, as there is a short trail of one that is 22.5 inches long in Texas, uncovered under tons of limestone? There are many myths and legends about gorillas in Africa before they were fully discovered to be just another animal. Based on our studies of dinosaur depictions worldwide, C14 dating of their bones, fossil human and dinosaur footprints together, and our collection of sightings and howls of alleged Bigfoot, we conclude with BFRO and other collectors of sightings like Dixiecryptid and Ohio Bigfoot and Buckeye Bigfoot videos that, 1. They do exist but in small numbers, as BFRO etc. suggest. Maybe several thousand nationwide of the giant ones. However, according to he gives a YouTube link here, the estimate is now 15,000 in Upper North America alone. Jeff Meldrum was in this video, but he did not give that estimate. But Jeff believes he had a night encounter with one, his first on this Canadian expedition in 2013 that just came to light in December of 2019. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they seem to be very intelligent. Don't bother us and we won't bother you. Number three, they seem to be curious of us as we are of them, but they have their dangerous ones just like we humans have ours. When they howl close by, it's like a warning. Move on. Therefore, they seem to be courteous to a point, but very scary and not lovable. Okay, there's a couple of more of these points, and I'm just, you all have heard, if you follow the Bigfoot thing, you've heard all of those theories, and I agree with them. The reason I did this and put it at the end of the video was because the man sent it to me. He spent a lot of time writing this. I wanted to get it out. It doesn't really follow the storytelling, theme that we do here, but I just felt like I needed to get it up for him, for Mr. Miller, Hugh Miller. So, Mr. Miller, I'm sorry it took me so long to do this. I just couldn't figure out how to present it. So I finally just did it. I just read it and I stumbled through it. Your sentences are extremely long, but they're more, you're writing something that's like a court testimony more so than a story. And so it's a little bit different to read, but, and I'm not going to edit it. I'm not going to do anything with it. Just going to leave it like it is. So there you have it. Hugh Miller, International Paleo Chronology Group, Columbus, Ohio. Those are the encounters he wanted you to hear. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Okay, that was a lot of fun to put together. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you're having a great Christmas month. This is the month of December. Christmas is in a couple of weeks. And I hope you're really happy and everything's going great for you. And I guess that'll wind it up. We'll see you guys on the next one. I really appreciate you. See you next time.